You may begin.
Good morning, class. It's a wonderful day to be here. Topic, video games do not promote violence. I'm not one to side with any political party, but after a massive tragedy, you might find the news turned into a political blame game. One thing you might hear take blame is video games. Virtual programs that serve to be entertainment, mostly popular with teenagers and young adults, like many of you in this class. Also, according to my survey, roughly half of you are unsure or do think that video games cause violence. I've been around video games my whole life, non-violent, violent, anything that really has war or sort of blood depictions, I consider that violent, as well as you, according to my survey. It doesn't really matter, I'm passionate about them. And hearing false claims like that really leave a bad taste in both me and also people invested in such a thing. So, did a lot of passionate research on academically verified articles to disapprove the stereotype formed by various sources. Hundreds of millions of people around the world play video games, yet crimes are only frequent in the US. Perhaps the video games aren't necessarily a determining factor related to the acts and behaviors of violence, as seen through case studies and other media. First, let's look at some case studies where video games have proven to have no correlation with violence. Video games have no relation to inspiring violence. Multiple case studies have been proven to show this, with them having diverse analysis on behavior before and after playing video games of various types. My first article is titled, "Does Playing Video Games with Violent Content Temporarily Increase Aggressive Inclinations" by Randy J. McCartney and other authors. This case study had a random diversity of people who tried two different video games. One has a clear depiction of violence with guns, war, and blood depicted, which is clearly violent, both according to me as well as the survey provided prior to this speech. The other video game was a puzzle game. The results showed that the puzzle game actually made people more aggressive, which leads to violence. The aggression came from the stress and irritation of the puzzle game and not the violent content itself. This kind of proves that it doesn't really stem from the content of the actual video game, but rather the mood it puts you in, which could be taken from anything in the first place, and not just video games. My second article, titled "Violent Video Games Do Not Cause Violence" by Eric Kane, is a case study which studies teenagers and their reaction to video games. The results of this case study showed that video games had a soothing reaction to most, relieving stress and also inspiring the need for cooperation, team bonding, and team working ethics. This shines as a positive light in video games content, which sort of proves that video games can have a positive relationship rather than a negative relationship like most stereotype. My third article, titled "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, a Meta-Analytical Review of Positive and Negative Effects of Violent Video Games" by Christopher John Ferguson. This is an analysis that looks into the risk of video games, concluding that those with increased visual-spatial cognition, ones whose thought processes revolve around their analysis and perception, might find risk in being inspired by video games, which could be increased by anything rather than just video games. Any piece of aggressive stress or violence from life could be enough for someone with this severe issue to actually be triggered by something like such, which means that video games is not rather the problem, but rather it's the individual who plays them, which sort of proves my point that it's not really from video games, but rather from life itself, and that it's not something that video games sort of blame to. Now that I've talked about the studies that prove video games do not cause violent behavior or acts, let's look into why the claims exist at all, and why these and why these people might be falsely led to believe that video games cause the violence. Video games are targeted for blame for a long time. Despite the existence of case studies, they are still stereotyped. Links between violence and sources of media has been disproven for years, which we can look at through other sources of media, such as TV, movies, and other board games as well. For my first article, it's titled, "For the People in the Back, Video Games Don't Cause Violence" by Jess Condit. This looks into and analyzes the source of video game stereotyping. This results of post-tragedy banter and blaming from politicians and their followers, which don't have the data correct to begin with. This also ends up spreading throughout the media, and it gets nitpicked through the details of the suspects' lives from massive tragedies, which could have been the result of any piece of media, and not just video games. Avoiding this stereotype and spreading awareness to such a thing can help, but to stop the blame of video games itself. My second article, titled "Learning by Doing" by Brendan Cross. Similar piece of media is movies and TV. It also provides entertainment, and it goes into detail about how it can't cause violence, and it's only made to bring you a different work for pleasure and entertainment by storytelling. This article includes an interview with many actors, some being controversial, who are known to play violent characters, many of them saying that anyone who could be motivated from such a character could take that aspect from anywhere in life, since it's violent itself. It's also good to note that many people watch movies and play video games all the time, and most people are completely fine. My third article, "The Great 1980s Dungeons and Dragons Panic" by BBC, dives into another piece of media similar to video games that provide entertainment, also known for being stereotyped. It's a tabletop game that was primarily known for its violent depictions in the 80s. It was first sparked as a violent piece of content when a 16-year-old prodigy at the University of Michigan took their own life. The media, in fear of public push to blame Dungeons and Dragons, knew and what was at the time unknown to the police was quickly blamed on something that many didn't know about. What happened to Dungeons and Dragons seems to be happening again with video games, and also happened with movies and television. In conclusion, video games might be violent, but they certainly don't cause it. Life itself is full of violence, and far more realistic to damage someone with mental issues. It's all stereotyping and nitpicking. Rather than blaming pieces of entertainment for issues related to tragedies, I think we should reach out to those at risk of harming oneself and others instead of blaming the actual content that they might have seen.